Hey, what's up guys? Nick the Informative Fisherman here. I'm out here chilling in my bass boat, and I wanted to go over something I get frequently asked, and that's when to use what swim bait. What's the first swim bait I should buy? Will they bite this type of swim bait year round? So I kind of wanted to fill in some blanks on the subject and give you some opinions on how I see them and when I like to use them to help better fill in those blanks for you guys to get started throwing big swim baits. When you're throwing big swim baits out there, you have to understand this is a trophy game, unless you're using it for search tools, and I'll get into that too. But it's a trophy game. You're looking for the biggest bass that live in the lake, so you're targeting a much smaller number of the population. There may only be 100 fish in that huge lake where you're normally fishing. If you're throwing a jig or a drop shot or something, you're fishing for 20,000 fish instead of 110 plus pounders. So the numbers are going to greatly decrease. This is why a lot of people don't realize when to use certain baits, because they'll throw them and they won't get a bite on them and they'll lose confidence in it. But even on a regular day throwing a swim bait, you may be looking at to catch 1 fish to 0 fish. A pretty good day is maybe 2 to 3 fish. A phenomenal day is maybe a limit. So you have to keep all this in mind when we're getting started here. Now, first things first here, I want you to think of the times where bass are more willing to eat a big meal versus not. The pre-spawn, when they're bulking up to get ready for that spawn, they're stuffing themselves full. More than likely willing to eat a bigger, larger bait. If you have calmer conditions, that water can get cleaner, where a lot of swim baits excel, not necessarily all, and we'll get into that. The late fall, the fall feed, just before winter sits in, that water gets down in the mid 50s, low 50s. Sometimes that fall feed sets in, and they're also much more willing to chase a bigger, larger bait. The post spawn for big topwater lures, the post spawn's a time where they eat those exception swim baits. Like, you know, when you look at a rat right here, you may think that's a wake bait, and you look at a giant catch topwater, 8-inch catch topwater like that, and you're like, well, that's a topwater bait. But when you go to like Tackle Warehouse and you look at the swim bait categories, you're going to see these big giant baits, and that's because they still fall into the category of that maybe 1 on an okay day, 3 on a pretty good day, and 4 to 5 on a phenomenal day. So this is that same key thing that we're going to keep in mind here. Post spawn, a lot of the time they're willing to eat a big topwater, or they're still willing to eat like a big glide bait. The pre-spawn, they're looking to bulk up, but they're associating to the bottom, so maybe something like a HUD. We're going to get into these categories. And then in the fall feed, you know, which they may still be in the creeks, and you still may be able to use topwater, you may be able to use a glide bait. But keep those 3 times in mind. That's the post-spawn, the pre-spawn, and the fall feed, because that's the popular times for big swim bait. So when you're fishing a big swim bait, you need to know what lives in that system. Are they primarily eating bluegill? Are they primarily eating kokanee? Primarily eating rainbow trout? You know, do you live in a small farm pond where they're primarily eating rats and frogs and stuff that come around the shoreline? You need to know this, because it's imperative when you get there that you're not using something 100% foreign. Not saying that 100% foreign won't work. I've caught plenty of, you know, trout looking swim baits, and I've thrown these in areas where trout didn't exist strictly because it was such a big profile bait, it intrigued them into striking. But first things first, in regards to swim bait fishing, you always want to start off matching the hatch. And let's start off in that category. When you're matching the hatch, I want to take and let's grab some trout imitating swim baits here. Let's take a look at this Huddleston. Let's take a look at this BBZ. And let's take a look at this Savage right here. When you look at these guys, the Huddleston's a boot tail, okay? Which basically just slowly kicks, and the body doesn't have a lot of movement. How does that appeal to a bass? Well, it's simple. You're dredging it, you're bouncing it along the bottom. This is the time of year when bass are associating to the bottom. The pre-spawn, they're down on the bottom, gradually moving in to those shallower flats, but they're associating down to the bottom. The later fall, they also tend to pull back down to the bottom once those shads start to die off. So if I was going to pick right here versus right here, let's say it's the post spawn, the bass already spawned and they're moving out into some trees over 30, 40 feet of water. Well, do I want to bounce across the bottom? Maybe. I might do that. But then at the same time, I might want to swim a floating big jointed swim bait through the top of the tree. So understanding its place and position is absolutely critical. You could say, look at these. All of these look like a pretty decent rainbow trout. Now, this is a soft one with a back hook. I could still bounce off the bottom. All right, these are all relatively inexpensive swim baits. I chose to show you the ones that are, you know, roughly $40, $50 or under. I'm not going to grab $150 to $300 swim baits and show you guys. I want this to be realistic for the person just getting into swim bait fishing, so you can purchase it. All this together is probably no more than a few $100s, which may seem like a lot, but in regards to swim bait fishing, it is not. So when you look at a back hook right here for this, if this is swimming over the head of bass, it looks very, very natural. Versus this swimming over the head of the bass, it doesn't look quite as natural, but it's also a little bit larger, to where this trout may have more drawing power for a larger bass versus this trout here. So let's say, you know, I threw this for a few hours, I didn't get any largemouth to follow this, so I dropped down a slightly smaller size to appeal to maybe those 5 to 8 pounders instead of throwing this, which is appealing maybe to those 7 to double digit fish. So you can look at the size and compare all these sizes together right here, and you see that BBZ is a little bit larger than all of them. Now, what does that also mean? If it's cleaner and calmer, if there's no ripples on that surface, a bait needs to look very, very natural. A bass is going to be able to analyze it from a long ways. You don't want it making a bunch of noise. So oftentimes, a hinging bait, a bait that's got noise and squeaks, you don't want to use in calm, clean conditions. You want a little bit of ripple on the water. You want that wind blowing somewhat. Maybe semi-staying. You could see down 5, 6 foot deep, but not like 30 feet deep. If you were fishing that scenario, let's say I was fishing that calm, crystal clean, I would probably throw something like that instead of the BBZ right there. So this is that Savage Gear line through, because it looks more natural, it doesn't make any noise, it's very, very subtle. So now, all that being said, these multi-segmented, so they have kind of a snaking action, all right? It's the same thing with this BBZ, has a very snake-like action. The wider a swim bait travels out side to side, the more drawing power it has. And the other drawing ability that a swim bait has is its overall profile size. So even though you look at a Huddleston, okay, which I got stuck in my deck there, and I'm bouncing this across the bottom, and it's very, very subtle, the head's not moving much, it's a pretty good sized trout. It's an 8-inch trout. So it still has drawing power, and I'm also bouncing this across the bottom near lethargic bass that are looking for that one wounded rainbow trout that's down there in an easy meal. I'm not necessarily trying to draw them over to it. So bigger has more drawing power. It appeals to those bigger fish, more subtle, more natural looking, less audio in the cleaner, calmer conditions.
Hang with us, guys. We'll be right back. Oh, you heard they got weapons of big fish destruction? Well, you heard right. Biwaa Fishing Performance is the newest company hitting the U.S. market by storm. With some of the sickest swim baits around and non-cookie cutter style lures that you could ever get your hands on. It's time to show these fish something new. Visit Biwaa.com. Hey guys, did you know that yours truly is now hosting Lucky Tackle Box's monthly panfish instructionals? And aside from relentless fish catching, I'll be breaking down the rigging and the gear you need to get going along the way. And of course, a few extra tips to help you score more fish on the goodies included in your box. So remember, the tug is our drug, so go visit LuckyTackleBox.com and get signed up today. Attention Northern California anglers, have you been to Boat Country in Escalon with one of the largest selections of welded aluminum fishing boats from North River, Hughes Craft, and now Crestliner? Chances are they have the right boat for you. And did I mention they have a full service center to take care of all your repair or boating maintenance needs? If you're a boat owner or just looking to become one, you owe it to yourself to check these guys out. Visit BoatCountryUSA.com or stop on by. We'll see you there. Bigger, better, badder. The evolution of the buzzbait is upon us. The Evolution Baits Grass Burner is a high-performance bass snatcher machine. High-end components, inline displacement, larger profile, balanced body for fast or slower retrieves, better deflection, and oversized treble hooks. You wouldn't bring a slingshot to a gunfight, would you? Find out more at evolutionbaits.com. Did you know that P-Line makes specialized lines for all your fishing needs? From the super strong abrasive resistant CXX or the low stretch super stealthy CX Premium, or maybe you're looking for invisibility or super bite detection with P-Line's 100% fluorocarbon. No matter what your needs, P-Line's got it covered. To find out more, visit P-Line.com.
P-Line, baby.
Ever tried pulling a planer board next to your boat when trolling or fishing from a swift current bank? If not, you're missing out on one of the most phenomenal fish catching machines on the market today. With Yellowbird planer boards pulling your lines perpendicular to your boat, you can't help but catch more fish. Find out more by visiting www.yellowbirdproducts.com.
Now let's take 3 swim baits that look roughly like kokanee. Northern California here, there's a lot of kokanee in our waters. Here's a RealPrey swim bait that's, I think it's like it's fast. I think it's a rate of fall 15 feet per 10 seconds. Now, the reason for that, in the fall and in the spring, kokanee can be as shallow as, I've caught them on the surface sometimes, but they're usually roughly 30 feet deep. So if you're casting a bait out there and you need it to get down faster, well, and bump the bottom, you have that top hook right there. So you can clearly see the basis for this one with a back hook is to get down and bump the bottom. And it does something very similar to a Huddleston with a slight subtle kick, and it has an open mouth. And a lot of the time a swim bait with an open mouth will give you just that slight, subtle, extra head movement, which kind of gives the body a little bit more natural movement. But kokanee are usually associated near the bottom, near deep ledges, and when they're juveniles, they're usually like a chrome in black, like that there. So what I want you to think about now is, let's say it's the fall feed and you're fishing for bass that are out on a hump in 25 foot deep, and you throw a glide bait out there like this. Well, let's say you look at the graph and you see all those big yellow arcs, and you see big bass, big streaks going through those yellow arcs. Well, you don't need to be bouncing it across the bottom if they're 15 feet deep and the island top's 30 feet deep. Now you need something in the middle of the water column, like a glide bait that has a ton of drawing power. A glide bait travels like that through the water. That bigger side-to-side movement is going to intrigue more bass to come up from a distance or farther away to come and get it. Glide baits have the most drawing power of all the glide bait category. Where glide baits really, really excel is when bass are suspended, or you're bringing it over the top of them. They're down in grass line, they're down in a tree, and you're subtly bringing this over the top of the tree because it has drawing power to bring them out. Glide baits are hugely beneficial as a sight fishing tool. I've been talking about this for years at my seminars. If you go to a lake and it's gin clear and shallow, okay, off to the sides, and you may have side imaging on your boat, but if you throw this by a tree and slowly reel it, you'll see the biggest fish in the system come out to look at this. They're not necessarily going to eat it. If you have a big bass come up and bump it and he didn't eat it, you might want to try coming back within an hour or two, because that fish may have just not been ready to overly commit. You can go back there and catch that fish, or throw another bait in there and catch them. Okay, so that's the glide bait for the suspended stuff. Now, this is the Biwaa Strout. This is a floating, I believe this model's the American shad. This is a floating model. Now let's say they just plant trout, or they just plant kokanee, or it's a really overcast morning and you see trout and kokanee near the surface. You see busting going on out there in the middle of these lakes. A floating, multi-segmented, you use it as a twitch bait. You rip it down and it just splashes and goes back and forth and stays on the surface. And even with subtle wind movement, that bait's moving, and you can kind of keep it in place like a popper, and they think it's a wounded fish that got planted, so they see it as an opportunity to come and get it. Or let's say you're right over the top of a tree. You see the tree sticking out, it's pre-spawn or post-spawn, and you know those big largemouth are sitting in that before they move up to the shoreline, or after they finish their spawn, they move back out, you could throw a big twitching floating swim bait like that over the top of the tree and pop it in place to draw those bigger fish out to come and get it. So those are like 3 kokanee options you have right there, and that would be the time and the place that you would want to fish it. All right, so let's get into our bluegill swim baits. Gantarel, the Savage Gear, I think that's Real Bluegill or 3D Gill, and then you have the Biwaa 7. Now, if you look at these, they're all extremely different looking, right? You can look at all these, and you look at this guy right here. He doesn't sink, but he doesn't really float. It's a suspending semi-glide bait. It has 3 segments, 1, 2, 3, and it does have a little bit of gliding action, not super wide. And you look at the same thing right here with the Savage Gear one, all rubber, top hook. Now you look at that Gantarel, bottom hooks. So now you know that, okay, well, maybe these bluegill aren't up super shallow, or I see bluegill hunkered along the bottom and I see some big bass out there. Well, if you see the bluegill closer to the bottom, that might be your choice with the top hook. They allow you to put the bottom hook on here too, so you can adjust it accordingly. Let's say it's a bright sunny day, the bigger bluegills tend to pull out a little bit deeper. So maybe you would want to fish it like that a little bit deeper if you're trying to fish for that bigger bass. The Gantarel here is, let's say it's slightly overcast and the bluegills are slightly shallower. Now bringing this over the top of a bass's head is going to intrigue them at that point. And we know the more gliding action it has, glide baits need that clearer water to have more drawing power. So if you see bluegill around, clean, clear, relatively calm out, a little bit of wind helps, not rip, snorting wind, but clear conditions, that might be your deal right there, or this might be your deal right here. This one has a little bit more audio to it, has a little bit more noise. So remember, if it's not windy at all and slick calm, that might be a better bet because it doesn't make any noise. If there's a little bit of wind and this isn't working, you might want to go with that. But remember, this is to have bass come up, this is to have bass come over, unless you rig it with that bottom hook. Now, contrary to popular belief, swim baits don't work in the summertime. Baloney. Swim baits that require drawing power, like glide baits, tend to not work very well in the summertime. Bluegill swim baits do work quite well in the summertime. The reason why swim baits lose their appeal in the summertime is because the water gets dirty, all right? So, well, we know that extra audio is going to help them, all right? So, the Biwaa 7 right here, and I used to believe that summertime swim baiting was kind of like a no-no, all right? Well, I got a hold of this bait about 3-4 years ago now, and I went out and started throwing this in the summertime. I stuck so many giants on this. It's heavy and it sinks fast. So I'm down there where those deeper fish are, and I'm reeling it fast to keep it off the grass, which I thought was an issue, but it was making so much noise. It was almost like a crankbait or a square bill. Look at that. I mean, look how bent out that one hook is from a monster that I raked in. I didn't even fix that hook yet. But it creates so much audio and so much displacement. It's moving fast. They hear it coming like a buzzbait subsurface. So in the summertime, don't be afraid to throw something like a Biwaa 7. You know, if you can't see down a couple feet, that's going to be your deal right there. You know, during the post-spawn when the bass are more willing to come up and chase bluegills, or the bluegills are messing with their beds, something like a Gantarel can work a little bit better closer to the post-spawn. And when they are spawning, that guy right there that you can bump down against the bed is much more effective for when they're spawning. This is something you might want to use on a day where you thought you were going to go out and bed fish and it got too overcast or too windy and you couldn't see the beds. Slow rolling something like this across the bottom can be very, very effective. Now, early into that fall, before the big fall feed, when the shad and everything are moving back into the creek arms, you know, you do have options. Biwaa does have a sinking version of the Trout, and then this RealPrey has this shad right here. This is not like a thread fin. This is a much bigger shad, more like matching up gizzard shad. But you could wake these very well, getting them just under the surface to where you see the ripple of their back. a lot of the time you could trigger one of those bigger bass that's back in those creeks following the bait fish in to target something larger. Let's get back into these real quick. The big topwater and the big rat. Yeah, some people argue that these are not swim baits, but they have that same appeal to them. What I find, and this is my experience, in the spring, once that water is like 60 or above, you have some bass, the biggest bass spawn early. And once that water's 60 or above, they are much more willing to eat a big topwater. I love to start throwing these in the post spawn and in the fall too. Once that water gets down to like 60 degrees in the fall, I love to start throwing these. 60 all the way down to like 55, I find these are phenomenal. And in the spring, when that water temperature first hits 60 and gets up to close to 70 degrees, because for some reason there's a lot of active fish that are willing to eat topwater and willing to eat mammals like this too in the post spawn, and I think it's because they're just so starved. They're willing to take the bigger opportunity to get that bigger meal in their belly. So in the spring, I like that 60 to 7 degree water temperature for a big giant topwater or a big rat, and in the fall, that 70 all the way down to 60 again at that point. Hopefully these tips helped you guys out. If you have any more questions, make sure to write them in the comments. Make sure to hit us up on Instagram, Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube right here. And make sure to click that little bell to turn on the notifications, guys. And sign up for our mailing list at informativefisherman.com. We'll see you next time and appreciate you watching.